The American presidency is a symbol of absolute authority. From this room, a single person commands the world's most powerful military and a geopolitical reach that touches every corner of the globe. Yet that authority is fragile. George Washington, the general who could seemingly do no wrong, watched his military get decimated in the Ohio wilderness by a native coalition under Chief Little Turtle. When he heard the news, he exploded in a rage that exposed the limits of his own control. Years later, James Madison became the first and only sitting president driven from Washington by a foreign army. He was forced to flee while British troops marched into the city and torched the White House, the Capitol, and the Library of Congress. Devastation is an absolute certainty for whoever sits behind that desk. These crises are inevitable, but they tend to strike a presidency in three distinct ways. While the office is designed to project an image of total strength, the internal reality of a term is defined by how a leader navigates the moments that strength fails. The first pillar of ruin is intimate tragedy. Weeks before his inauguration, Franklin Pierce was traveling with his wife and son when their train car derailed and rolled down an embankment. Pierce survived the crash, but found his 11-year-old son Benjamin crushed and nearly decapitated in the wreckage. The grief was so overwhelming that Pierce entered the presidency a broken man, even refusing to swear his oath on a Bible. Calvin Coolidge faced a tragedy that began with something as minor as a blister. His 16-year-old son, Calvin Jr., developed the infection while playing tennis on the White House courts. In 1924, there were no antibiotics to stop the infection. The boy died of sepsis, and Coolidge later wrote that when his son went, the power and glory of the presidency went with him. Even absolute geopolitical supremacy offers zero protection against the random cruelty of human mortality. Other crises are not forced upon the president from the outside. They originate from self-inflicted wounds and administrative hubris. John F. Kennedy discovered this when the CIA-led invasion of the Bay of Pigs went sideways. The operation was easily anticipated and crushed by Fidel Castro, leaving over 1,000 American-trained exiles captured and the president deeply humiliated. Dwight Eisenhower faced a similar embarrassment when he lied to the world about a downed spy plane over the Soviet Union, claiming it was merely a weather research craft. The lie collapsed when Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev produced the living pilot, Francis Gary Powers, who confessed to being CIA. Eisenhower was caught in a global lie on the world stage. This pattern reached its peak with Richard Nixon. The smoking gun tape proved he had ordered the CIA to obstruct the Watergate investigation, a move born of his own political paranoia. Faced with certain conviction in the Senate, Nixon became the first and only president to resign the office on national television. These moments prove that the gravest threats to an administration often emerge from within the Oval Office itself. The final pillar consists of massive national emergencies, where the scale of the disaster moves faster than the government can respond. Herbert Hoover watched helplessly on October 29, 1929, as the stock market crashed and the Great Depression began. This chart tracks the steady economic growth of the 1920s, right up until that final week in October. In a single day, $14 billion in wealth evaporated. The speed of the wipeout left the administration with no viable way to stop the bleeding. 12 years later, Franklin Roosevelt faced a similar shock when the Japanese Navy launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, killing over 2,400 Americans and crippling the Pacific Fleet in under 2 hours. In the wake of these massive shocks, a president loses the ability to dictate events and must instead serve as a reactive shock absorber for a traumatized nation. This weight remains constant in the modern era. Barack Obama has called the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary the darkest day of his presidency, an event that forced him to carry the raw grief of 20 families. Gerald Ford carried the trauma of total geopolitical defeat, watching the chaotic fall of Saigon as Americans scrambled onto rooftop helicopters to escape the end of a 20-year war. Abraham Lincoln endured the ultimate national rupture, watching the country tear itself apart after the shelling of Fort Sumter. He had to lead the Union through a war that would ultimately claim 620,000 American lives. Every term eventually becomes an endurance test. A leader's character is most visible when they are under the pressure of these inevitable, crushing events. History records a leader's legislative record, but it reserves its most intense scrutiny for how that leader held a broken nation together during its darkest hours.